Good morning, Your Eminencies, members of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, dear sisters and brothers, greetings. Let me start by thanking Cardinal Turkson for the invitation to come here. I think he's otherwise engaged. I also thank him for the lack of plastic water bottles, which usually dominate in most conferences. I am here in terms of a vision from the field, climate challenges in developing countries. I talk of things seen at present and of what societies in Asia Pacific are seeking. I speak of 4 areas of change, all interconnected. The objective is to identify key challenges and contribute to strengthening relations and systems by focusing on experiences and lessons learned. How is the world of climate change seen in the field, and what are we called to bridge? Recently, a friend relayed local events to me where a rural woman killed her 4 children and committed suicide. A week later, her husband killed himself. This is a very sad story of a very poor family in despair. How can the poor secure daily needs and at the same time be helped to sustain the natural resources around them? How can we have full cycle production and lifestyles that care to include others without waste? That would truly be good news. The 4 areas of change and of challenge that I speak of: 1, climate change and resilience that challenge us to reduce vulnerability and to increase adaptation measures that changes the status quo. 2nd, land use change and relations in the landscape that challenge us to increase forest cover, reduce chemical use on commercial agriculture, and improve water. 3, food security and resource needs that challenge us to ensure that production and distribution of food is socially and equitably distributed in accordance with people's needs. And 4, culture, livelihood, and integrity that challenge us to find a sense of belonging in each culture and country, while livelihood ensures a quality of life, giving reason to live. Climate change. Climate change. Typhoon Haiyan. Typhoon Haiyan was a near-perfect storm, riding across the Pacific for 6 days in November 2013, on course for Tacloban City, Philippines. The scientific measurements, the social realities of vulnerability and infrastructure were all known before the event. We knew what was coming, but not how to act. We need to break the cycle of vulnerability. Knowledge is not action. Science and technology do not impact without personal, political, and economic commitment. Science can more actively support societal transformations by engaging elements of society in their concerns. Defining hazards, responsibilities, and protocol are critical in addressing vulnerabilities to climate change and have effective community evacuation strategies. That's what you're seeing on the board up there. That's okay. The precautionary principle, no, it's okay. The precautionary principle should now be a norm in addressing environmental concerns. Scientific certainty should prevail as a point in time for comprehensive action. As with relief and building back better in Banda Aceh, the assessment of the Philippines reveals the need to learn new forms of government in times of crisis. The challenges on the ground of communication and social learning, governance and solidarity are very evident 2 years after Haiyan. The 10 lessons learned I will not proceed with here, but obviously we've talked this morning about switching to a low-carbon national economy and lifestyles, which is urgent. A carbon lifestyle makes our Asian urban centers barely inhabitable. Beijing city government last December issued a red alert. Schools, construction sites, traffic were all restricted. Air pollution index had reached 500, and in other cities it was double or treble that. The government has since implemented new policies, the Air Pollution Prevention Law and also a Soils Pollution Prevention Act plan. The kind of science we need is a science where people matter. A science, then, is not simply a problem of knowledge, but of identifying society's problems and setting these as priorities of investigation and communication. Great commitment is needed in doing sustainability science, as engaging society in problem solving requires much adjustment in all sectors to trust and to work together. Number 2, land use change and relations in the landscape. The planet's boundaries, of which we're familiar with, we've put on the landscape where I am, as they're easier for people to see where they connect and where they can make a contribution. Climate change, air pollution, and ocean acidification are all due to the use of fossil fuels. The use of fossil fuels is not a planetary boundary, but a boundary of global economy as presently designed. Other driving forces are land use change and novel entities. There's about 10,000 compounds out there for which we are not sure of what their impact is. And they add to the threat both in agriculture and the threat in terms of biodiversity. These 3 key boundaries affect the stability of all other boundaries and also the marginality and migration of the poor. We have seen the loss of forest in every country in Asia, and recently with the expansion of oil palm. For Indonesia, both the loss of such carbon sinks and the release of carbon into the atmosphere are global concerns. Recently, the country's constitutional court annulled the government's ownership of customary forest areas and ruled that members of customary societies have the right to use the land to fulfill their personal and family needs. We need to see this happen in a sustainable way. Policies and strengthening of legal framework are essential in addressing national ownership of the problems and control of international corporate abuse. Another example is the legal action taken in China over toxic liquids dumped in the Tenjeur Desert and the oil spill in Bohai Bay and emission violations of imported vehicles. A new environmental law of 2015 now allows for public interest litigation. Third area, food security and resource needs. Social development has not kept pace with the rapid economic growth, and there are two faces in Asia, one of progress and prosperity, the other of continued poverty. Rising incomes and affluence continue to drive greater demand for more protein-rich food, with enormous implications in food production. Rising prices, especially rice and wheat, affect food sovereignty with greatest impact on the poor, who allocate 50 to 70% of their budget to food. We know education is never free, and we have health concerns as well. So there is very little left when one has bought food for the family. With 60% of the population relying on local agriculture, climate change is a major challenge for food security. Current food production and distribution systems are failing to feed the world. Agriculture produces enough for 12 to 14 billion people, enough even for the projected 2050 population. And still, 1 in 8 of the world's population are chronically hungry. The cause of hunger is not lack of food, it's lack of access and inability to buy. With increasing urbanization, as in China, maintaining food security will be an accompanying priority in the region as arable land becomes scarce, apart from rehabilitating heavily contaminated land and restoring aquifers. Farmers are also aging. In the Philippines, the average age is 57. And rural youth are increasingly uninterested, least because of the labor and the risks that result in insecurity. The fourth point was culture, livelihood, and integrity. China has adopted a forest-based program to improve environmental conditions and reduce rural poverty, with relevant success in increasing forest cover and rural household income. The experiences of community in the counties of Ningxian, Anhui, and Lidu illustrate the impact of collective forest tenure in improving income and employment while ensuring levels of environmental protection. In the modern age of medicine, it is hard to understand the figure that 65 to 80% of the global population relies on medicines derived from forests as their primary health care. Yet the Yao people living across the mountains of southern and southwest China, or Zhao in the mountains of Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar, are one of the foundations of Eastern and Chinese medicine today. Cultures are living relations, not simply preserved ways of the past, and so there is a need to adapt. Some of the Pulangian youth who live on the land of their ancestors in Mindanao, Philippines, are making a new path. They like motorbikes, cell phones, and computers in the modern world, yet they spend their time now growing trees on steeper slopes, protecting the spring sources of their community. Indigenous peoples need not simply be laborers on their ancestors' land, but dignified communities contributing to the richness and sustainability of society. The role of such communities in forest management needs to be integral to their practices and can be shared more widely if their contribution to ecological services is respected. These communities are not merely tourist destinations and living museums, but critical learning experiences for our urban and academic communities. Nurturing a community of practice for reconciling with creation helps us more effectively network for justice. If we collaborate, the impact of our action broadens. Learnings are greater when we participate in joint action. So in summary, what's the vision? It's provision of credit, it's provision of insurance for small farmers, it's inclusion of farmers in more resource management and effective environmental action, regeneration of forests, but also soils and water resources. Control of chemicals in commercial agriculture is a major concern, particularly with Roundup Ready and glyphosate chemicals. Regulation of animal feeds. Youth education focused on leadership in service, not just excellence. And education, as we have said, on the social and environmental roles of people and communities. So scenario planning and what if. We need a language in government not of crisis and not of denial, but of scenario planning, adaptive management, and the acceptance of uncertainty and of uncontrollability. Key words and actions are undoubtedly sustainability in human development, biosphere integrity, but we've got to work with roadmaps and scenario planning, not just efficiency and maximum yields. All of society needs a deeper and more community sense of social and environmental roles, forming communities of practice. This is what is crucial, not just ideas, but communities of practice where possible. And so with COP, we probably recognize with Driss El-Yazami, head of civil society activities during COP22, what are the crucial and basic elements and the problems and needs of Africa. It is through the deeper sense of humanity that he calls for the universalism that enables all to act together, even if the historic responsibilities and failures, responsibilities and future effects are not equally shared. So the last word is in terms of Laudato Si, of compassion and practice. Laudato Si has undoubtedly placed the environment and the poor at the center of climate change and sustainable development discussions. In the Catholic world of Asia Pacific, where if translated and shared, it is first an experience of felt compassion by the poor, that someone shares their pain and their suffering. For those who have worked long in the care of the environment and community, it is an absolution for their works are not wasted. The ecological inversion needed to bring lasting change is also a community conversion to a new way of practicing change together. So first, it entails gratitude and the reconciliation and the recognition that the world is gift. Thank you.